But the growth here of a Western-type civilization, with all that this means in terms of trade and transport and industrialization, inevitably threatens the future of the horse. Some ancient breeds, such as the unique Asil, were indeed in danger of extinction. In a land where traditionally women have always taken second place, one woman has undertaken the task of saving the last remaining Asil herd. Gharagozlou has done this by reviving the old tradition of taking the horses annually up to a gentler climate in the hills. Her formula: migrate to survive. The start of a new day. To these horses, it's just like any other. In fact, they're being prepared for a journey of over 500 kilometers that will take 14 days, entail a difficult river crossing, and a journey by railway train, plus a stiff climb of 2,000 meters. They're setting out on a journey from the hot, dry climate of the desert into the lush green pastures of the Zagros Mountains. Traditionally, this herd of horses migrated simply because their owners, the Bakhtiari, always spent the hot, dry Persian summers in the relative comfort of the hills and took all their possessions, including their horses, along with them. Today, the migration is undertaken solely for the sake of the horses. It has no other purpose. Experience has shown that these rare and valuable Arabian horses become tougher, more versatile, and breed more prolifically, producing healthier foals if they are migrated. Gharagozlou, who has lived and worked among Persian horses most of her life, is in charge of the whole complex operation. More than 60 horses, their foals, and 40 men. As the horses are saddled, the 3 trucks that will accompany the expedition are loaded up with everything that will be needed en route. Fodder for the horses, bedding, food and drink for the men, even supplies of water for the early part of the journey through the desert. The departure of the herd and the men who will travel with it is always a big day for the villagers of Akhili, who stop work to watch the procession of precious horses wind their way out of the village and into the surrounding desert. Some of these women will not see their menfolk again for 6 months. Other men in the party, who came down with the horses from Barkhane, haven't seen their wives since last autumn. The first obstacle, the Karun River. The stallions cross 3 at a time on the local ferry, and a particularly calm and docile horse is always chosen to lead the other 2 on board.
دستش نره جلو دستش نره جلو برو برو
The fortress of Obbeed, which means water willow. It was the winter headquarters of the Bakhtiari chief Sardar Motashem, and at tribal gatherings the plain around the castle would have been crowded with over 5,000 tents. Sardar Motashem inherited some Asil horses from his father and formed the nucleus of the present-day herd. In the early stages of the journey, the horses have to cross scorching, dry desert terrain. In the heat of high noon, the line of horses briefly becomes a shimmering mirage hovering over the hot sands. It's a relief to the whole expedition when the first camp is reached and the horses are tethered down for the night.
Originally, I think, when the migration started, taking Arab horses up to the northern ravine and back, with Sardar Motashem was probably to make, because it was more convenient, the tribes migrated, they took their horses with them. But eventually, I think he caught on to one thing, is that they orientate better to high and low altitudes. And this is what we found when we took over the stables with his son, is that a horse raised in Khuzestan, or in the south, where altitude is low, does not have the ability to orientate himself to high altitudes too easily. You have to take him 1 or 2 years. But horses that do migrate from the time they are small, from the time they are foals, have a very easy time and become much better mountain horses too. And I think primarily this was probably eventually the real reason that he kept on with the migration and believed that it was much better to have an Arab horse that migrated from the time it was small till it grew up. It made a better mountain horse, it made a better horse for low and high altitudes, a horse that could withstand heat and cold. One thing, of course, that had to be considered in the past was the question of fodder. You have green pastures here all through the winter, starting sometimes early autumn, sometimes later autumn, through till about the end of March. After that, you don't have any green fodder, therefore the tribes always moved. And of course it was much more economical to move their horses with them. But for us, of course, that's not important, but what is important is that we do have a much broader breeding season. In other words, we can have foals coming in the summer, which we certainly could not have if we were staying in Khuzestan, because any foals born after approximately the end of February have a very hard time in summer. Some of them die, and the rest are very stunted.
Another obstacle now faces the expedition, the town of Desfoul. It would take too long to skirt its ever-spreading suburbs, so they lie up in a camp just outside the town until 4 a.m. They then head straight through the center at dead of night, when it's as quiet as it's ever going to be. Another reason for leaving at this hour is that it reduces the weight of the railhead, where it's not easy to control the horses. This is a normal freight train, specially adapted to take these distinguished passengers across a particularly difficult tract of desert and mountain.
و یه اسم یه اسبش هم ببر مثلا اون بالا افریت با ساله دومی تیمور با علی نقی و احمد یکی Well, the secret of loading horses onto a train without having too many mishaps is to know the personality of the horses you're loading and to choose a very courageous horse for the first one, and usually the most nervous one should come afterwards, because it's not only that he must see another horse getting on the train, it's that he must feel the personality of the first horse. If the first horse goes on calmly and quietly, he doesn't experience any anxieties about what he's going to do himself. But if the first horse should act nervous or back up or look at things in a strange way, the second horse gets a little bit suspicious. Again, the last one going on also should be a calm horse. Because if you watched when we were loading, the first 6 or 5 go on very fast. But then it gets a little bit crowded inside, and while we're tying up the, let's say, 5th one, the last one is either waiting on the flank or outside alone. So he must also be calm, so that he will enter without any horse going before him. And this is one thing that's not really realized by great many people, at least here handling horses, is that the personalities of horses is very important in any dangerous thing that you want to do. Yavaş, yavaş. Yavaş. Get over here. برو اون طرف یه کویه رو همون صحرای غزلو بردار جلو Crossing wherever there's any traffic, whether it be through towns or across paved roads, is becoming more and more hazardous each year because the traffic is increasing a great deal. About 20 years ago, when this migration was done by the same stable, then owned by my former husband, there was much less of this danger, and it was much more pleasant, much pleasanter, since one did not have to contemplate the fact that one could be run over.
A very special camp. They're going to be here for 2 nights and a whole day, to give both men and horses a bit of a rest. This stop also allows the men to slip into a nearby town and replenish stocks and buy a few presents for their families. A downpour of rain, unusual at this time of year, means makeshift raincoats for the horses. It also means injections against possible pneumonia.
Food during the trip is limited to such things as can be made for a large number of people with the equipment we have. Mainly we have rice with a choice of side dishes. Sometimes as a change we have our national soup, which is called abgusht and is eaten with bread broken in it. The thin bread is called lavash. It is a leavened bread made with whole wheat flour and can keep for several days. The watchman's duty is mainly to be careful that horses do not get loose, either due to careless tethering or because they are frightened by wolves in the darkness or by the presence of a scent that they imagine is dangerous.
Mary's 2 dogs, Dashti and Alosha, always make the round trip with her, usually well out in front because they know every inch of the way. The return of the Asil herd is a big event for the villagers in the hills. And if the horses are a day or 2 late, they begin to get worried. The whole village turns out to welcome Mary and her costly cavalcade. Although one Asil stallion can be worth $80,000, not a single animal will be sold until the herd reaches adequate strength. they get over the ridge here, they can see their destination from the top of the pass. But the nomads have already arrived before them. They set out much earlier, stopping to graze their beasts for a day or two whenever they came across suitable pastures. The final village on the route. And the womenfolk of the community bring out bowls of burning incense and charcoal, a traditional spiritual cleansing rite, obligatory before people who've been out of the area can re-enter it. It's the end of the journey. And for Mary, it means a return to her family home, where she first learnt to ride. She presented these stables, once the property of her family, to the Royal Horse Society of Iran as part of her contribution to the project of restocking and upbreeding her late husband's unique herd of Asil.
پیاده شو پیاده شو پیاده شو جان پیاده شو ماشیناتونو بکشین به طرف چیزی
Yes, well, every year when we arrive in Varkane, aside from the relief of getting over the migration, it's looking forward to a summer that's always very pleasant, because Varkane is not only very cool, it's also quiet. The mountain country is very beautiful. We do a lot of mountain riding during the summer. And this year we had something very special to look forward to, and that is the coming of about 9 foals, all from a stallion that we lost last autumn and from whom we have had no foals at all. As you watch these young horses, one sees that the Royal Horse Society, which was founded for the preservation and the betterment of Iranian breeds of horses, has succeeded in preserving the Asil, which from this year on will increase yearly. These young horses that are running now in the paddock, this autumn we'll go back doing the migration on foot. The coming year, if we should migrate to Varkane, the young foals that shall be born within the next month will be those that will inhabit this paddock. And so it will go on.
year on will increase really.